Sierra 1, give me a solution, or we are dead in 10 seconds. The voice in her earpiece wasn't asking. It was bleeding. Lieutenant Kalen's panic was a jagged frequency cutting through the static. Down in the valley, thermal signatures flared white-hot. SEAL Team 4 was pinned against the mud walls of the courtyard, effectively blind. Senior Chief Elena Vance didn't blink. Through the scope of her Mk-13 Mod 7, the world was a grid of math and wind. She ignored Kalen's screaming. If she answered, she'd lose the rhythm. 9 seconds! They're bracketing us! Elena shifted the crosshair. Range, 840 meters. Wind, full value, left to right. She saw what the SEALs couldn't. Not just the gunman on the roof, but the shadow movement in the irrigation ditch 3 clicks east. The mortar crews synchronized to wipe the grid coordinates where the SEALs were huddled. 5 seconds. Echo, talk to me. To save them, she had to violate the primary ROE. Do not engage without positive identification of a weapon aimed at U.S. forces. The mortar team hadn't assembled the tube yet. Technically, they were civilians digging a hole. Practically, they were executioners. If she shot, she saved the team, but faced a court-martial for engaging unarmed targets. If she waited for them to mount the tube, the first round would kill Kalen. 3. Elena stopped breathing. Her heartbeat slowed to match the gap between seconds. Send it, she whispered to herself. Not the radio. The first shot broke the silence of the valley. Not with a bang, but with a wet thud that signaled the end of a career and the beginning of a massacre. The wind in the Hindu Kush didn't blow. It cut. It was a physical entity, a razor of ice and dust that sought out the gap between collar and helmet, finding skin and turning it numb. Senior Chief Elena Vance didn't feel it. Or rather, she chose to acknowledge the data point, ambient temperature -12 degrees, and then filed it away in the part of her brain that didn't matter. Check your spacing, Miller, she murmured, her voice a vibration in her throat mic rather than a sound carried by the air. Copy, Senior Chief, came the ragged breath of Petty Officer First Class David Miller behind her. He was 10 meters back, struggling with the weight of the spotting scope and the radio pack. He was good, top of his class at recon, but he was new to the altitude. The air here at 11,000 feet was thin enough to make a man doubt his own lungs. Elena paused, crouching beside a jagged outcrop of shale. She scanned the ridgeline above them through her NVGs, night vision goggles. Green phosphor washed the world in a spectral, grainy daylight. Nothing moved, no heat signatures, just the endless, indifferent geometry of the mountains. She adjusted the sling of her rifle. The Mk-13 Mod 7 was a heavy beast, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, with the suppressor, bipod, and the Night Force attacker scope. It weighed nearly 15 pounds. It was an extension of her skeletal structure, a third arm she had carried for 12 years. We have 40 minutes to sunrise, Elena said, checking her wrist. If we aren't in the hide by then, we're blown. I'm good, Echo. Just, the scree is loose. Miller scrambled up next to her, keeping low. Don't apologize, just move. Their objective was a limestone shelf overlooking the village of Almere. Intelligence called it a key leader engagement. A SEAL team, call sign Viking, was inserting at 0600 Zulu to snatch a mid-level Taliban financier. Elena's job, as Sierra 1, was to sit on the shoulder of the mountain and play God. If Viking got into trouble, she delivered the wrath. If they didn't, she was just a rock with a pulse. They pushed the final 100 meters. The incline was 45 degrees of loose gravel. Elena dug her boots in, thighs burning, ignoring the protest of her knees. She was 34, ancient for a field operator, but her endurance was built on a foundation of stubborn refusal to quit. They crested the ridge. The view opened up, a sprawling amphitheater of darkness. Below the village of Almere was a cluster of mud brick squares, silent and dark. No lights, no fires. "Too quiet," Miller whispered, dropping his pack and immediately setting up the tripod for the spotting scope. "It's 300. People sleep, Miller." Elena unslung her rifle, sliding into the prone position behind a natural berm of rock. She began the ritual, bipod legs down, buttstock adjusted, scope caps flipped. "Yeah, but no dogs?" Miller asked, pressing his eye to the glass. "Every village in this sector has dogs. I don't hear a single bark." Elena paused. He was right. The absence of noise was a noise in itself. "Check the heat," she ordered. "Scanning. Negative on the courtyard. Negative on the rooftops. Wait." Miller tweaked the focus. "I've got heat bloom in the Kanat system, the irrigation tunnels." Elena shifted her aim, dialing the magnification down to 12x to widen her field of view. The Kanats were ancient underground water channels. Through the thermal overlay, she saw faint wisps of heat rising from the ventilation shafts. "Occupied," she confirmed. "More than a few. That's a lot of body heat for a sleeping village." She looked at the designated landing zone, LZ, for the SEALs. It was a flat patch of dirt 2 kilometers to the south. Perfect for a helicopter. Also perfect for a pre-registered mortar strike. "Viking lead. This is Sierra 1. Elena keyed her radio, the encryption chirping. "Radio check. Sierra 1, Viking lead. Read you 5x5. We are wheels up. ETA 20 mics." The SEAL commander's voice was confident, bordered on arrogant. "Viking, be advised. We have significant heat signatures in the subterranean networks. The village feels sterile. No biologicals on the surface, no dogs." "Copy, Sierra. Intel says the HVT is paranoid. Probably keeps his people tight. Maintain overwatch. We are executing as planned." Elena cut the mic. A cold knot formed in her stomach, distinct from the mountain air. "He's brushing it off," Miller said, looking at her. "He has his orders. We have ours." Elena pulled a veil of camouflage netting over her head and scope, blending into the stone. "Range card. Now. I want distances to every intersection, every rooftop, and that irrigation ditch to the east." "On it." As Miller lays the targets with the rangefinder, reciting numbers, Mosque, 640 meters, North intersection, 710 meters, Elena settled her cheek against the stock. She slowed her breathing. In, for 4 counts. Hold, for 4 counts. Out, for 4 counts. But the feeling wouldn't leave. The silence of the village wasn't peace. It was a held breath. "Miller," she said softly, "prepare the backup frequencies, and get the dope for the mortars." "The mortars? We don't see any mortars, Chief." "Not yet," Elena whispered, her crosshairs hovering over a flat mud roof that offered a perfect line of sight to the LZ. "But if I were them, that's where I'd kill us." The wind howled, erasing their whispers, as the distant thrum of rotors began to bleed into the night. The vibration of the inbound rotors was a distant throb in the air, a rhythmic heartbeat that usually brought comfort to anyone wearing an American flag patch. But to Elena right now, it was a masking agent. It was noise that covered other noise. She froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for her dope card, stopped in midair. "Miller," she whispered, the sound barely escaping her lips. "Stop." Miller, who was settling the spotting scope into the shale, froze instantly. He didn't ask why. He knew better. "What is it?" he mouthed, his eyes wide behind his NVGs. Elena didn't answer. She slowly rotated her head, scanning the jagged spine of the ridge to their immediate right, about 15 meters away. The wind was gusting from that direction. Underneath the scent of sage and freezing rock, she had caught something else. Faint, organic, the smell of unwashed wool and old tobacco. She signaled Miller. Hold. Eyes on sector. She pushed herself up from the prone position, moving with the slow, fluid deliberation of a predator. She left the heavy MX-13 rifle on the bipod. At this range, a 30-pound sniper system was a liability. She reached for her belt and unsheathed the Winkler combat knife. The blade was dark, non-reflective steel, coated to kill without glinting in the moonlight. Elena crept into the shadows of a large boulder, her boots finding the silent patches of dirt between the loose scree. The thermal overlay on her goggles was a wash of cold blues and purples, but as she rounded the rock formation, a spot of red-white heat flared in the periphery. There was a crevice, a natural fissure in the mountain that offered a perfect view of the valley floor. Tucked inside, wrapped in a heavy patu blanket, was a figure. He was watching the valley, a radio handset pressed to his ear. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was watching the approach vector of the helicopters. Elena's mind raced through the calculus. If she challenged him, he might shout. If she shot him, the crack of the suppressed round, even quiet, would still sound like a whip crack in this acoustic bowl. The village would wake up. The mission would be burned. Viking would fly into a hot LZ. There was no choice. She covered the last 3 meters in a surge of violence. The scout sensed her at the last second. He spun, dropping the radio, his hand reaching for an AK-47 propped against the rock. He was too slow. Elena slammed into him, her left hand clamping over his mouth, driving his head back against the stone wall of the fissure. The impact was dull and heavy. He thrashed, his legs kicking out, boots scraping against the gravel. He was strong, wiry, fueled by panicked adrenaline. She felt his teeth sink into her gloved palm. She ignored the pain. She drove the knife in. It wasn't like the movies. There was no instant cessation of movement. There was resistance, muscle, gristle, the desperate biological refusal to die. Elena had to hold him, locking her legs around his to pin him down, feeling the frantic spasms of his body against hers. She twisted the blade, severing the connection to the brain, waiting for the mechanics of biology to fail. The struggle lasted 6 seconds. It felt like an hour. The scout's body went rigid, then slack. The weight of him settled heavily onto her chest. Elena didn't let go immediately. She held the body for another 10 seconds, ensuring the threat was absolute. Her own heart was hammering against her ribs, a violent drum solo in the silence. She pushed him off and rolled to her knees, gasping for air that felt too thin to sustain her. She looked down. In the green glow of the phosphor, the face stared back at her with wide, sightless eyes. He wasn't a man. The skin was smooth, unblemished by the harsh sun of the valley. No beard, just a chaotic fuzz on the upper lip. He couldn't have been more than 15. A child tasked with watching the mountain while the men slept or prepared below. Elena stared at the boy. A wave of nausea rolled through her gut, hot and sour. She swallowed it down. This was the job. The bullet doesn't care about age. The mission doesn't care about innocence. If he had keyed that radio, 20 SEALs would be flying into a wall of lead. He was a combatant, she told herself. He was a trigger. She wiped the blade on the boy's wool blanket and sheathed it. Her hands were steady, even if her soul felt like it was cracking. Echo? Miller's voice came over the comms, tight with worry. Status? Clear, Elena said. Her voice sounded foreign to her ears. One enemy KIA, scout. We are secure. She reached down to search the body. Pockets contained sunflower seeds, a crumpled photo of a girl, and a cheap battery pack. She picked up the radio he had dropped. It was a ruggedized handheld, likely stolen from an ANA unit or bought on the black market. She was about to turn it off when the speaker crackled. The voice on the other end was a harsh whisper, cutting through the static in rapid-fire Pashto. Ahmad? Current position? The birds are 2 minutes out. Is the trap set? Elena stared at the radio in her hand. The blood on her glove smeared against the black plastic. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. She looked at the dead boy, then out at the valley where the distant thumping of the SEAL helicopters was getting louder. The trap wasn't just set. The trigger man had just checked in, and he was expecting an answer. Miller, Elena said, moving back toward the OP, leaving the boy in the cold shadow of the rock. Get Viking on the horn. Now. What did you find? We are not observing a sleep cycle, Elena said, sliding back behind her rifle, the cold metal pressing against her shoulder. We are observing a kill box, and we're already inside it. The sun in the Garm Valley did not rise gently. It detonated over the eastern peaks, instantly transforming the freezing purple dawn into a harsh, bleached white reality. For Elena, the shift brought a new kind of torture. The cold that had seeped into her bones for the last 4 hours was replaced by a suffocating heat. Under the ghillie suit and the Kevlar, sweat began to pool at the base of her spine. The air grew thick, shimmering with heat distortion that made the distant mud walls of Almere dance like a hallucination in her scope. Dial back the magnification, Elena murmured, not taking her eye off the rubber eyepiece. Mirage is kicking up. I'm losing edge definition at 800 meters. Copy, Miller whispered. He was shifting uncomfortably. The dead boy was less than 20 meters away, tucked into the fissure, but the knowledge of the body seemed to itch at Miller more than the heat. Viking is at the hold point. They're waiting for the signal. Elena didn't reply. She swept her optic across the village. It was 0900 local time. By now, a rural Afghan village should be a chaotic ecosystem of survival. There should be goats moving to pasture, men gathering by the mosque, smoke from cooking fires, children running in the dust. Instead, Almere was a stage set. Talk to me about pattern of life, Elena said, her voice tight. Miller checked his logbook. Intel stated normal agrarian activity, high traffic in the market sector. We should be seeing movement. I see movement, Elena said, zooming in on the western edge of the village, away from the target compound. Sector 4, the alleyway behind the tanneries. Tell me what you see. Miller traversed his spotting scope. Silence stretched for 10 seconds. Females, Miller said. 3, no, 5, and children. They're moving fast. Look at what they're carrying. Bundles, large ones. Looks like everything they own. Elena felt the cold knot in her stomach tighten. In counterinsurgency, this was the reddest of flags. Civilians didn't pack their lives into bundles and flee their homes at breakfast unless they knew the roof was about to come down. They weren't going to the market. They were clearing the kill zone. They're sanitizing the battlefield, Elena said. They know we're here. They know Viking is here. She keyed her radio, bypassing the local net, and going straight to the mission commander circling in the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, miles away. Overlord, this is Sierra 1. Be advised, we are observing a mass exodus of non-combatants from the target sector. The pattern of life is negative for normal routine. I repeat, the village is scrubbing itself. Recommendation is to abort or delay insertion until we can reconfirm the threat matrix. The pause on the line was agonizing. Elena could hear the static hiss, the sound of bureaucrats weighing satellite feeds against the gut feeling of a sniper in the dirt. Sierra 1, Overlord. UAV feed shows the courtyard is calm. We have a positive PID on the HVT entering the main structure. We are green to execute. You are seeing local migration, possibly a wedding or market day. Stick to your lane. Elena's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. A wedding. It was the standard dismissal. The eye in the sky saw pixels. It didn't see the terror in the way a woman clutched her child, or the hurried, stumbling gait of people fleeing a blast radius. They aren't listening, Miller whispered. They want the HVT. Viking lead, this is Sierra 1. Elena tried the ground commander directly. Did you copy my traffic to Overlord? The atmosphere down there is wrong. It's too clean. Copy, Echo. The SEAL team leader's voice came back, calm but dismissive. We appreciate the concern, but we're on the clock. If the HVT is there, we're taking him. Keep your eyes open for squirters. Elena exhaled, a sharp hiss through her nose. It was the curse of her position. She was an observer, not a decision-maker. She was a woman in a hide site telling a room full of officers that their expensive operation felt wrong. She returned to the scope. The women and children had vanished into the ravine, leaving the village completely devoid of life. Then, movement. Target building, Miller snapped. Courtyard. Elena shifted her aim. The target compound was a 2-story structure with high walls. In the center of the dust-packed courtyard, a man walked out. He was wearing a white shalwar kameez and a black vest. He stopped in the center of the open space, completely exposed to the sky, to the drone, and to her. He took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one. That's him, Miller confirmed. Mustafa al-Zarqawi. Positive ID. Elena stared at the man. He was a high-level financier, a man who had spent 10 years hiding in caves and tunnels. Men like that didn't stand in the middle of a courtyard at 0900 hours and smoke a cigarette while American helicopters were buzzing 2 valleys over, unless he wanted to be seen. He's bait, Elena whispered. He's the cheese in the trap. Viking is moving, Miller said. They've crossed the phase line, 2 minutes to breach. Elena adjusted her turret. Elevation, 6.2 mils. Windage, left, 0.5. She was dialed in on the HVT's chest. She could end it right now. 1 trigger pull, and the bait is gone. But her ROE was strict. Observation only, unless Viking's under direct fire. She watched the smoke curl up from the man's cigarette. He looked up, almost as if he could see her through the miles of air and heat shimmer. He wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at the mountains. He smiled. Miller, Elena said, her voice dropping to a flat, deadly monotone. Scan the ridgelines opposite us. Forget the village. Look for the high ground. Why? Because he's not worried about the SEALs coming through the door, she said, her finger resting on the trigger guard. He's waiting for the show to start. The radio crackled. Sierra 1, Viking. We are stacking on the breach point. Going dark. Elena didn't blink. The silence of the valley was about to tear open, and she was the only one who knew that the explosion wasn't going to come from the SEALs. Visual on Viking 1 through 4. Passing the bazaar now. Elena's voice was a flat line, stripping away the anxiety gnawing at her gut. Through the ATCR scope, the SEALs were not men. They were pixels of tan and multicam moving against a background of brown mud. They moved with that distinctive, predatory fluidity of Tier 1 operators, weapons up, spacing tight, checking corners with mechanical precision. "Copy, Sierra," Viking lead's voice crackled. "We are moving to the target compound. Distance 100 meters. From her perch, 2,000 feet above, the village of Almir looked like a maze drawn by a madman. The streets were narrow, winding ribbons of dust that defied logic. But from this altitude, the geometry of the trap was becoming sickeningly clear. The target building wasn't just a house. It was the bottom of a bowl. To get to the front gate, Viking had to move down a main avenue that was overlooked by 3 distinct 2-story structures. "Miller," Elena said, not looking up. "Check those rooftops again. Sector north and east." "Scanning," Miller replied. "Still clear. No weapons visible, just laundry hanging on the lines." Laundry. Sheets. Large, opaque sheets strung up on lines that blocked the view of the windows behind them. "It's blind," Elena realized. "They've hung sheets to block our angle on the firing ports. Viking, hold position." "Say again, Sierra?" Viking lead sounded irritated. They were exposed, in the middle of the street. Stopping was death. "I don't like the approach vector," Elena said rapidly. "The rooftops on your left and right flanks are screened. I can't clear the windows behind those sheets. Recommend you hook left, cut through the tannery, and breach from the rear. Do not, I repeat, do not take the main avenue." There was a pause. Down in the valley, the line of SEALs hesitated. "Negative, Sierra," Viking lead came back. "The tannery puts us in a fatal funnel with no egress. Intel says the front gate is soft. We have speed. We are pushing through." Oscar Mike. Elena watched them start moving again. They were sprinting now, closing the distance to the compound where the man in white had smoked his cigarette. "They're walking right into it," she whispered. She tracked the point man. He was moving past the first screened rooftop. Nothing happened. He passed the second. Still nothing. The silence of the village was heavy, a suffocating blanket that amplified the thudding of her own heart. "Maybe we're wrong," Miller said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe they really did just run." "No," Elena said. "They're letting them in." The SEALs reached the outer wall of the target compound. They stacked up on the heavy wooden gate. The formation was textbook. Breacher up front with the explosive charge, heavy weapons covering the rear, team leader coordinating. "Setting the charge," the breacher announced. "Breach in 5. Elena scanned the courtyard inside the walls. The man in white, the HVT, was gone. The cigarette butt was probably still smoking on the ground. The courtyard was empty. Too empty. "Viking, check your corners," Elena warned. "The HVT is no longer in the open." "Copy. Breach, breach, breach." A puff of gray smoke bloomed on the gate, followed a split second later by the dull thump of the detonation reaching her ears. The wood splintered inward. The SEALs flooded into the courtyard, flowing like water, shouting commands that were lost to the distance. "Room 1 clear, room 2 clear, moving to the main structure." Elena watched from her God's eye view. As the last SEAL entered the courtyard, she saw movement, not inside the compound, but on the perimeter. On the rooftops she had warned them about, the laundry sheets twitched. They didn't billow in the wind. They were pulled down. Behind the sheets were not windows. They were murder holes. Dark, jagged gaps knocked into the mud brick, perfect for machine guns. "Viking, contact rear, rear!" Elena screamed, abandoning brevity. The rooftops! It was too late. The first RPG didn't hit the seals. It hit the archway of the gate they had just passed through, collapsing tons of mud and timber, sealing them inside the courtyard. Contact! Contact! Taking fire from the north! The radio exploded into chaos. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had slammed shut. The seals were inside, the compound, but the enemy wasn't in there with them. The enemy was outside, on the high ground, looking down into the courtyard, like kids looking into a bucket of ants. "Miller, designate!" Elena yelled, racking the bolt of her rifle. "I can't see them!" Miller panicked. "They're firing from deep inside the rooms! No muzzle flash!" Down below, the courtyard was turning into a dust storm of impacts. Bullets were chewing up the ground, pinning the seals against the only cover they had, the low walls of a dry fountain in the center. They aren't trying to kill them, Elena realized with a jolt of horror. She watched the pattern of the tracer fire. It was high, suppressing. It was keeping them pinned. "Why aren't they finishing them?" Miller asked, his voice trembling. Elena looked past the village, past the chaos. She looked to the east, where the irrigation ditch lay in the shadow of the opposing mountain. "Because they don't want to shoot them," Elena said, her blood running cold. "They want to bury them." She saw it then. A subtle movement in the ditch, a metal tube being elevated, a base plate being kicked into the dirt. The mortars. The seals were bunched up in a 10-meter circle. A single 82mm mortar round dropped in that courtyard wouldn't just hurt them, it would erase them. "Viking, you need to move! Indirect fire imminent!" "We can't move!" Viking Led screamed, the arrogance gone, replaced by the jagged edge of desperation. "We are pinned! Give me suppression, Sierra! Do something!" Elena settled the crosshair. The distance was extreme, the wind was tricky, and the targets, the mortar team, were technically just men digging in a ditch. They hadn't fired yet, but they would, in seconds. The valley, which had been silent moments ago, was now a reverberating drum of concussive noise. From her position, Elena watched the ambush unfold with the detached, horrifying clarity of high-definition optics. The courtyard of the target compound was a dust bowl of impacting rounds. The seals were huddled behind the low stone rim of a dried-up fountain, the only cover available in the kill zone. "Sierra, I need suppression on the north wall, second floor, now!" Viking Lead's voice was shredding through the headset, competing with the staccato rattle of PKM machine gun fire. "On it," Elena said, her voice dropping into the dead zone of focus. She didn't aim for a head. There was no time. She aimed for the window frame where the muzzle flashes were blooming like angry fireflies. Breath, squeeze, recoil. The heavy 300 Win mag bucked against her shoulder. The round slammed into the mud brick windowsill of the north building, exploding in a cloud of dust and debris. The machine gun fire from that window stopped for a second. "Traversing right," she signaled Miller. "Two shooters, east building, lower level," Miller called out, his voice climbing an octave. Elena shifted. Bang! She put a round through a wooden shutter. Bang! She put another into the shadows. It wasn't enough. It was like trying to stop a flood with a teaspoon. For every shooter she forced to duck, two more popped up from different murder holes. They weren't exposing themselves. They were sticking their barrels out of slits and spraying the courtyard blindly. They didn't need to aim. The seals were fish in a barrel. "Man down! Viking 2 is down!" The scream on the radio cut through Elena like a physical blow. Through the scope, she saw a seal crumple, his leg a ruin of red wetness against the gray dust. Another SEAL dragged him by his plate carrier, sliding through the dirt as bullets kicked up spurts of earth inches from their helmets. They aren't maneuvering, Elena realized, her mind racing. Miller, look at them. The enemy. They aren't trying to flank. Standard ambush tactics dictated that you pin the enemy, then maneuver an assault element to finish them. But the insurgents weren't moving closer. They were staying back, pouring fire into the courtyard to keep the SEALs exactly where they were. They're fixing them, Miller said, looking up from the scope, his face pale. They're pinning them to the X. Elena looked away from the chaotic firefight in the village and swung her rifle back to the east, toward the irrigation ditch she had spotted earlier. The heat shimmer was worse now, but the image was undeniable. 3 men were in the ditch. They weren't panicking. They weren't shooting rifles. They moved with the terrifying, methodical slowness of a construction crew. One man was adjusting the bipod legs of a metal tube. Another was peeling the foil seal off a green crate. Mortars, Elena whispered. 82 millimeter, maybe bigger. Distance? Miller asked. 840 meters. They're bracketing the courtyard. It was the perfect trap. The gunmen in the houses were the anvil holding the seals in place. The mortar team was the hammer. Once that tube was dialed in, they would drop a high-explosive shell right into the fountain. The walls of the courtyard would contain the blast pressure, liquefying everyone inside. "Overlord, this is Sierra 1, Elena yelled, breaking protocol. "I have a mortar team setting up in Grid 84 Alpha. Priority target. Request immediate air support or permission to engage." The response from the Tactical Operations Center was maddeningly calm, filtered through layers of digital distance. Sierra 1, Overlord. Drone feed is obscured by smoke. We cannot confirm weapons on the subjects in the ditch. ROE is strict. Do not engage without positive identification of hostile intent. We are retasking a Reaper, ETA 4 mics. 4 mics? Elena wanted to scream. They'll be dead in 1. She looked back at the ditch. The man with the sight was checking a bubble level. He held up his hand. The loader picked up a mortar round, a teardrop of cast iron filled with Composition B explosive. They weren't hostile intent yet. They were just men with hardware. Until they dropped that round in the tube, the lawyers back in Florida would say they were technically non-combatants in a war zone. But Elena knew the math. Flight time for an 82 mm mortar at this range was roughly 12 seconds. If she waited for them to fire the first round to confirm intent, that round would be in the air before she could pull the trigger. She would kill the crew, yes, but the round would still land, and Viking would still die. "Viking lead," Elena said, her voice turning eerily calm. "You have mortars setting up, east flank. You are the target. Can you take them?" The SEAL commander didn't ask about ROE. He didn't ask about permission. He sounded like a dead man asking for a reprieve. Elena looked at the wind flags she had mentally painted on the grass. Full value wind. Left to right. 15 miles per hour. "Miller," she said, "give me the dope." "Echo, we don't have clearance," Miller warned, his hand shaking on the spotting scope. "If you shoot them before they mount that tube, that's murder. That's Leavenworth." "Give me the dope." Miller swallowed hard. He looked at the men in the ditch, then at the dying SEALs in the courtyard. He put his eye back to the glass. "Elevation 4.2 mils. Windage hold, 2.5 left. They're stacking rounds, Echo. They're going for a rapid fire." Elena dialed the turret. Click, click, click. The turret stopped. The crosshair settled on the chest of the man holding the mortar shell. He was laughing at something the gunner said. The radio crackled with a new voice. Kalen, the Viking JTAC. Sierra 1, give me a solution or we are dead in 10 seconds. Elena took a breath. She let it out. The world narrowed down to a single circle of glass. The politics, the rank, the prison cell waiting for her, it all dissolved. There was only the math, and the men about to die. "Spotter ready?" she asked. "Spotter ready," Miller whispered. Elena's finger took up the slack on the trigger. "Major, if we don't act now, we'll lose the whole team. We have 10 seconds to decide." The plea from the Viking JTAC was a ghost in the machine, echoing in the earpiece. Elena tuned it out. She tuned out the screaming of Overlord on the command net. She tuned out the wind howling at 15 miles per hour across the valley floor. She was no longer a person. She was a platform. Through the Night Force scope, the world was a grid. The man holding the mortar round, Target 1, was laughing. He had the teardrop-shaped explosive cradled in his arm like a football. He was 3 seconds away from dropping it into the tube. "Sierra 1, this is Overlord. You are not cleared hot. I repeat, hold F." Elena exhaled, pushing the air out of her lungs until she hit the natural respiratory pause. The reticle settled on Target 1's sternum. She squeezed. Crack. The rifle bucked, the suppressor swallowing the explosion but not the recoil. Elena didn't blink. She rode the recoil, her hand already flying to the bolt handle before the bullet even impacted. Up, back, forward, down. Through the scope, she saw the result. Target 1 didn't fall. He was erased from his feet. The .300 Winchester Magnum round, traveling at supersonic speed, slammed into his chest. He collapsed backward. The mortar round he was holding fell into the dirt, rolling harmlessly away from the tube. One down. The other men in the ditch froze. For a split second, they didn't understand. There was no sound of the shot yet. The bullet had arrived before the sonic crack. They looked at their fallen comrade, confused. That confusion was their death sentence. Crack. Target 2, the gunner adjusting the sights, spun violently as the second round caught him in the shoulder, tearing through the brachial artery. He slumped over the tube, knocking the alignment off. Up, back, forward, down. "Wind is shifting. Dial left 0.2. Miller screamed, his voice cracking. He was calling the shots now, locked into the rhythm with her. He wasn't thinking about the court-martial anymore. He was spotting the fall of shot. The remaining 6 men in the ditch scattered. Panic broke the spell. 2 of them dove for the mortar rounds in the open crates, trying to load the weapon in a suicide frenzy. 2 others grabbed AK-47s leaning against the trench wall. They were fast. Elena was faster. Crack. Target 3, reaching for a shell. The round hit him center mass. He dropped on top of the crate. Crack. Target 4, bringing an AK up. Headshot. The pink mist vaporized in the heat shimmer. The rhythm was mechanical, terrifying. It wasn't the chaotic spray of a machine gun. It was the slow, methodical tolling of a bell. Every 2.5 seconds, a man died. "Cease fire! Sierra 1, cease fire immediately!" Overlord was screaming now. The voice in her ear was apoplectic. "You are engaging unarmed combatants! Abort! Abort!" Elena didn't hear it. She was in the bubble. Target 5 and 6 were running now, scrambling up the back of the irrigation ditch, trying to reach the cover of the tree line. Running targets at 800 meters. A nightmare for a sniper. "Lead him 2 mills!" Miller barked. Elena swung the rifle, tracking the running man. She placed the crosshair in the empty air in front of him, trusting the math. Crack. Target 5 crumpled mid-stride, tumbling down the embankment like a broken doll. Crack. Target 6 made it to the trees. He paused for a fraction of a second to look back. That was his mistake. Elena put the round through the trunk of the sapling he was hiding behind. The tree splintered. The man fell. 6 down. 2 left. The last 2 weren't running. They were hiding behind the dead body of the gunner, trying to pull the mortar tube down to salvage the weapon. Elena's magazine was empty. "Reloading," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She stripped the empty mag, grabbed a fresh one from her vest, and slammed it home. She racked the bolt. The valley was silent now. The shooting in the courtyard had stopped. The SEALs had stopped firing. The insurgents in the houses had stopped firing. Everyone was watching the ditch. Everyone was watching the invisible hand of death that was picking men off one by one. Target 7 raised his hands. He was surrendering. Elena hesitated. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Then she saw it. Target 7's right hand was behind his back, holding a grenade. He pulled the pin and lunged toward the mortar tube, intending to frag the weapon so the Americans couldn't take it, or use it as a booby trap. Crack. The bullet took him in the neck. He dropped the grenade. It exploded in the ditch, a dull thump that threw dirt and body parts into the air. Target 8 was caught in the blast. He didn't move again. "Clear," Miller whispered. "Targets neutralized. All 8. Elena lowered the rifle. The barrel was radiating heat. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull ache. She looked at the ditch. It was a graveyard. The mortar tube lay on its side, useless. The rounds were scattered in the dust, unfired. "Viking!" Elena keyed the mic. Her voice was rasping. "Mortar threat eliminated. You are clear to move." There was silence on the net. Absolute, stunned silence. Then Viking Lead's voice came back, breathless, sounding like he had just seen a ghost. "Solid copy, Sierra. Solid copy. Thanks for the assist." "Sierra 1. Overlord's voice cut in, icy and formal. "Commander wants a debrief. Immediately. You are to stand down and await further instructions. Do not fire another round. Do you copy?" Elena slumped back against the rock. She felt the adrenaline crash hitting her, the shaking starting in her hands. She had saved them. 12 men were alive because she pulled the trigger, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had just ended her career. "Copy, Overlord," she whispered. "Echo," Miller said softly, grabbing her shoulder. "Don't get comfortable." "What?" "Look at the village, the gunmen. They stopped shooting at the SEALs." Elena dragged herself back to the scope. Miller was right. The windows facing the courtyard were empty. The suppression had stopped. "Where did they go?" "They're reorienting," Miller said, pointing to the north ridge parallel to their position. "They figured out the angle. They know where the shots came from." A heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud began to echo off the canyon walls. It was a sound every operator dreaded. A DSHK heavy machine gun, 12.7mm rounds that could punch through brick, rock, and body armor like paper. The impacts didn't hit the SEALs. Rock shards exploded 3 feet above Elena's head, showering her in razor-sharp stone. "Displace!" she screamed, rolling away as the ridgeline where she had lain for 4 hours disintegrated under a storm of heavy-caliber fire. The hunters had become the hunted. The mountain exploded. It wasn't a metaphor. The limestone shelf that had been their sanctuary for 6 hours disintegrated into a cloud of razor-sharp shrapnel. The 12.7mm rounds from the DSHK didn't just hit the rock. They pulverized it, turning the geology itself into a weapon. Elena curled into the fetal position behind the main boulder, her hands clamped over her helmet. The noise was a physical assault, a rhythmic, deafening hammering that vibrated through her chest cavity. Thump, 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 thump. Each impact sent a fresh shower of stone chips raining down on her back. "Miller! Status!" she screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony. "I'm pinned! I can't move the spotting scope!" Miller yelled back. He was 5 meters to her right, pressed flat into a shallow depression. The heavy DSHK rounds were walking a line toward him, chewing up the ground inches from his boots. "Leave it! Leave the gear!" Elena bellowed. "Pop smoke! We are displacing! Now! Now! Now!" In the sniper community, your rifle is your life, but your optics are your soul. Abandoning the high-end glass was a sin, but staying here was suicide. The enemy gunner on the North Ridge had their range perfectly dialed. He wasn't spraying. He was dismantling their cover piece by piece. Miller reached for the smoke grenade on his vest. He pulled the pin and hurled it over the lip of the ridge. A hiss of white phosphorus erupted, quickly blooming into a thick, opaque cloud that drifted down toward the enemy view. "Move! While the smoke holds!" Elena grabbed the drag handle of her pack, slung her MiG-13, and scrambled on her hands and knees toward the rear slope. She made it to the defilade, a dip in the terrain that offered momentary protection from the direct line of fire. She spun around, weapon up, waiting for Miller. He wasn't there. "Miller!" Through the thinning white smoke, she saw him. He was crawling, dragging his left leg. His face was a mask of shock, pale and sweating beneath the grime. The dirt behind him was streaked with bright, arterial red. "I'm hit," Miller gasped, collapsing as he reached the edge of the depression. "Leg. I think it's the bone." Elena didn't think. She moved. She grabbed his plate carrier and hauled him over the lip of the defilade, sliding down the scree slope until they were out of sight of the DSHK. The heavy machine gun kept hammering the ridge above them, oblivious that its targets had slipped away. She rolled Miller onto his back. The injury was ugly. A round, or a massive piece of rock, had smashed into his left thigh just above the knee. The fabric of his pants was shredded, soaked in blood that was pumping out in jagged spurts. "Tourniquet, on it!" Elena ripped the cat tourniquet from her med pouch. "It burns, Echo. God, it burns!" Miller was hyperventilating, his eyes losing focus. "Look at me, David!" Elena snapped, using his first name to anchor him. She slid the strap high up on his thigh, near the groin. "This is going to hurt. Bite down." She cranked the windlass. 1 turn, 2 turns. Miller screamed, a guttural sound that tore at her throat. She cranked it a 3rd time until the bleeding stopped. She locked the rod in place and checked the time written on the strap. 095. "You're good. You're stable," she lied. He wasn't stable. He was going into shock, and they were still on the side of a mountain, 3 miles from safety, with an angry hornet's nest buzzing above them. She keyed her radio. "Viking lead. This is Sierra 1. We are compromised. Taking heavy fire. Miller is WIA, urgent surgical, requesting immediate extraction at secondary LZ." The silence on the radio was heavy. Then the sound of rotors grew louder. But they weren't coming toward the mountain. They were fading. "Sierra 1, Viking lead." The voice was strained, cut with static. "We are loaded. Birds are full. We are taking fire on the egress. We cannot, repeat, cannot, return to your sector. The LZ is too hot. Airspace is being denied by heavy AAA." Elena stared at the sky. She saw the 2 Blackhawks banking hard to the south, popping flares as tracers reached up for them from the valley floor. They were leaving. "You have a man down!" Elena screamed into the mic. "Turn around!" Overlord orders our RTB immediately with the HVT. The pilot's voice cut in, cold and detached. Sierra 1, you are instructed to initiate evasion plan Alpha. Move to alternate pickup point Hotel. We will come back for you when the air clears. Out. The transmission clicked off. Elena looked down at Miller. He had heard it. The hope drained from his eyes, replaced by the terrifying realization of abandonment. They left us, he whispered. We saved them, and they left us. Elena grabbed his vest and pulled him upright. They didn't leave us, Miller. They're just resetting. It was another lie. They were abandoned. The 10 seconds incident had made them radioactive. Command wasn't going to risk 2 helicopters to save a sniper team that had just violated a direct order. Can you stand? She asked. Miller tried to put weight on his leg and collapsed, crying out, I can't. Leave me, Echo. You can move faster alone. Elena looked at the ridge above them. She could hear shouting now. Pashto, the enemy patrol was coming up to check the bodies. They would find the blood trail. They would find the gear. And then they would come down here. She looked at Miller, then at the endless, rugged terrain of the Hindu Kush stretching out behind them. I'm not leaving you, she said, her voice hard as granite. We walk out, or we die here. Those are the options. She holstered her rifle and grabbed his arm. Put your arm around my neck. We move on 3. 1, 2, 3. She hoisted him up, taking his weight. Her knees buckled, then held. They began the agonizingly slow descent into the ravine, leaving a trail of scuffed boots and blood drops in the dust. Behind them, on the ridge, the silhouette of a fighter appeared against the sun. He looked down, saw the movement, and raised his radio. The hunt had begun. The physics of a human body change when it becomes dead weight. Elena knew the manuals. She knew the fireman's carry, the hawser drag, the 2-man support. But the manuals were written for training grounds with flat dirt, not for a 60-degree incline of shifting shale in the Hindu Kush. Miller was a large man, 200 pounds of muscle and gear. Even with his plate carrier ditched back at the ridge, he was an anchor dragging Elena toward the center of the earth. Set down, Miller gasped, his boots scraping uselessly against the rock. Just a minute. Elena let him slide gently against the wall of the ravine. They had moved maybe 600 meters in an hour. It wasn't enough. The enemy patrol that had spotted them on the ridge would be moving faster. They didn't have a wounded man. They had rage and knowledge of the terrain. Elena dropped to a knee, her chest heaving. The air was hot now, a dry kiln that sucked moisture from her eyes and throat. She checked the tourniquet on Miller's thigh. The black nylon strap was tight, burying into the meat of his leg. The bleeding had stopped, but the leg below the strap was turning a waxy, pale gray. Time? Miller asked. He was staring at the sky, his eyes too bright, pupils dilated. It's been 40 mics since application, Elena said, checking her watch. You're good. We have time. She didn't tell him the truth. After 2 hours, tissue damage became permanent. After 6, he'd lose the leg. They were nowhere near a hospital. She pulled the radio handset from her webbing. The icon for encryption lock was blinking. Signal was weak, bouncing off the canyon walls. Overlord, this is Sierra 1, she rasped. Status on QRF? Static. Then, a voice that was different from before. Not the tactical officer. This was someone higher up, a voice polished by air conditioning and distance. Sierra 1, this is Overlord Actual. Be advised, QRF is negative at this time. The airspace is contested. We have reports of manpads in the sector. I don't care about the airspace, Elena snapped, the veneer of military discipline cracking. I have a casualty. Critical. If you don't pick us up, he dies. Copy, Sierra 1. We understand. However, due to the nature of the engagement at the objective, we are assessing the situation. Your actions regarding the Mortar team are under review. Until we clear the legal status of the engagement, we cannot risk further assets. Elena froze. The words hung in the hot air like poison. Under review, it wasn't the airspace. It wasn't the missiles. It was the politics. She had shot 8 unarmed men. Even though they were setting up a weapon to kill Americans, the optics were messy. Command was freezing her out until they figured out if she was a hero or a war criminal. If she died out here, the investigation died with her. You're abandoning us, Elena said flatly. Negative, Sierra. We are shifting to Evasion Plan Alpha. Move to Point Hotel. Hold until nightfall. We will attempt to extract under cover of darkness. Overlord out. The line went dead. Elena stared at the handset. Point Hotel was the extraction marker 5 kilometers away, up another mountain range. With a healthy team, it was a hard hike. With Miller, it was impossible. They aren't coming, are they? Miller asked. He hadn't heard the voice, but he saw Elena's face. Not until dark, Elena said, shoving the radio back into her pouch. We have to move. Echo, listen to me. Miller grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, clammy. Leave me. Hide me in a cave. You run to Point Hotel. Guide them back. Shut up, Miller. I'm serious. You can't drag me 5 clicks uphill. You'll die and I'll die anyway. Elena looked down at him. He was right. Logically, tactically, he was absolutely right. The smart play was to cache the wounded and move fast. But Elena Vance wasn't running on logic anymore. She was running on a cold, burning fury. They wanted her to disappear. They wanted her to die quietly so they wouldn't have to explain her shots to the press. I am not leaving you behind, she said, leaning in close. You are the only witness I have. You are the only one who saw those mortars. If you die, they bury the truth. So you are going to stand up, and we are going to walk. She hauled him up. Miller groaned, a sound of pure agony, but he found his footing on his good leg. They took a step, then another. The sound reached them before the visual, a high-pitched yipping echoing off the canyon walls. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was biological. Elena stopped. She turned her head, listening. Dogs, she whispered. The Taliban didn't typically use dogs, but foreign fighters did. Chechens, Al-Qaeda specialists. If they had brought tracking dogs, the smoke grenades and the terrain masking wouldn't matter. She looked back down the ravine. About a mile back, where the trail curved, a flock of birds suddenly took flight, startled by something moving through the brush. The net was tightening. New plan, Elena said, scanning the canyon walls. She spotted a narrow washout, a scar in the rock caused by flash floods, leading up to a cluster of boulders. We aren't going to Point Hotel. Where are we going? We're going to ground, she said, unslung her rifle. We can't outrun dogs, so we have to kill them. The sound of a dog tracking a human scent is distinct. It isn't the rhythmic barking of a guard dog warning off an intruder. It is a series of sharp, excited yips followed by the heavy, wet sound of panting as the animal pulls against the lead. Elena heard it clearly now. They were less than 800 meters behind. Stop, Miller wheezed. He slid down the side of the limestone wall, his face the color of wet ash. The tourniquet on his leg was holding, but the pain was sending him into shock. Every step was a fresh trauma. Echo. Stop. Elena dropped to one knee, scanning the terrain. They had entered a narrow washout, a scar in the earth where seasonal floods had carved a trench through the rock. The ground was hard-packed clay and loose gravel, good for hiding footprints, useless for hiding scent. They have a blood trail, Elena said, looking at the dark droplets that had leaked through Miller's bandage despite the pressure. And they have wind. They'll be on us in 10 minutes. She looked at Miller. He was finished. His eyes were rolling back, fighting to stay focused on her face. If she kept dragging him, the dogs would catch them both in the open. It would be a massacre. We split up, Elena said. It wasn't a suggestion. Miller shook his head weakly. No, don't leave me. I'm not leaving you. I'm stashing you. She grabbed his collar and hauled him toward a depression under a shelf of overhanging rock. It was shallow, barely deep enough for a man, filled with dried sagebrush and silt. Get in, she ordered. She shoved him into the hole, packing the dried brush around him. It offered visual cover, but it wouldn't fool a dog's nose for a second. Give me your bandage, she said, reaching for his leg. What? The outer dressing. Give it to me. She took her knife and sliced a strip of the blood-soaked gauze from the outside of his wound dressing. Miller groaned as the pressure shifted, but she ignored him. She held the bloody rag in her hand. It was a beacon, a chemical flare for the animals hunting them. Listen to me. She leaned in, her face inches from his. I'm going to draw them off. I'm going to take the scent line up the ridge to the east. When they follow me, they will pass right by you. If they have thermal, Miller whispered. It's 1100 hours. The ground is 100 degrees. Thermal is washed out. They are trusting the dogs. She checked his rifle. He still had a magazine, but he was in no shape to shoot. She took his pistol instead, shoving it into his hand. Don't shoot unless they step on you. If you fire, you die, understand? Miller nodded, his grip on the pistol trembling. Come back for me, Echo. Count on it. Elena stood up. She took the strip of bloody gauze and tied it to the back of her belt. She was no longer just a sniper. She was the bait. She didn't move quietly anymore. She ran. She scrambled up the opposite side of the washout, kicking loose rocks, scuffing the dirt, creating a disturbance that even a blind man could follow. She wanted them to know she was here. She wanted the dogs to smell the fresh blood and the adrenaline and the panic. She pushed herself hard, lungs burning in the thin air. She climbed a steep finger of rock that jutted out perpendicular to the ravine, leading away from Miller's hiding spot. Every 50 meters, she paused to rub the bloody gauze against a rock or a bush, laying down a scent highway. The barking behind her changed pitch. It became frantic, aggressive. They had caught the fresh scent. Good, she thought, a grim satisfaction settling in her gut. Come and get it. She reached the crest of the ridge. Below her, the terrain opened up into a chaotic field of boulders and scrub brush. It was a sniper's playground, a place of shadows and angles. She stopped running. She untied the gauze and dropped it prominently on a flat rock. Then, she executed a J-hook. Instead of continuing forward, she cut a hard 90-degree turn, looping back around in a wide arc until she was positioned on the flank of her own trail. She found a crevice between two massive slabs of granite, squeezed herself in, and pulled the veil of her ghillie suit over her head. She wasn't running anymore. She was waiting. Below her, movement. The patrol emerged from the ravine. 6 men, 2 dogs, lean, wolf-like mixes straining at chain leashes. The handlers were struggling to keep up. The fighters were relaxed, confident. They thought they were chasing a wounded animal that was bleeding out. They weren't checking their corners. They were looking at the ground. One of the dogs lunged forward, dragging its handler toward the rock where Elena had left the gauze. The animal snarled, snapping at the blood-scented cloth. The handler shouted something, laughing. He unclipped the leash. The dog bolted forward, nose to the ground, following the phantom trail Elena had left. The second handler released his dog too. The men followed, weapons slung low, walking right into the kill zone she had prepared. Elena watched them through the scope. She watched them pass the point of no return. They were 300 meters away from Miller, moving away from him, drawn by the scent of blood she had laid out. She adjusted her parallax. She checked the wind. The rabbit had done its job. Now, the wolf had to eat. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the lead dog. The mechanics of the shot were identical to the hundreds she had taken on paper targets at range cards. But the target was not paper. It was a muscle-bound, 90-pound Malinois mix moving at 20 miles per hour. Elena led the animal by 6 inches. Crack. The suppressed round caught the lead dog in the shoulder, driving through into the chest cavity. The animal's momentum carried it forward in a tumbling heap of fur and dust, silencing its bark instantly. Chaos erupted. The second dog, confused by the sudden collapse of its packmate and the supersonic snap of the bullet, spun in a circle, snarling. The handler screamed, yanking the leash, but Elena was already working the bolt. Up, back, forward, down. She didn't shoot the second dog. She shot the handler. The bullet struck him center mass, punching through his chest rig. He dropped the leash and fell backward, his AK-47 clattering against the rocks. The second dog, now loose and panicked, bolted into the scrub brush, abandoning the fight. "Contact! Contact front!" the patrol leader screamed in Pashto. The remaining 4 fighters reacted instantly, diving behind boulders and unleashing a wall of automatic fire toward the ridge where Elena's shot had originated. Rock chips exploded around her hide site, the air filled with the angry hornet buzz of 7.62 mm rounds snapping overhead. Elena was already moving. The moment she broke the trigger on the second shot, she had rolled backward, sliding into the deep crevice between the granite slabs. She didn't stay to watch the bodies fall. That was a rookie mistake. A sniper's best defense was uncertainty. She crawled 10 meters south, dragging her rifle through the dirt, keeping the massive rocks between her and the kill zone. She emerged at a secondary firing position, a small gap in the rocks she had identified minutes ago. She peered through the scope. The 4 survivors were suppressed by their own fear. They were pouring fire into her previous position, wasting ammunition on empty air. They were bunched up, shouting to each other, their eyes fixed on the false summit. Elena settled the crosshair on the radio operator. He was frantically trying to call for reinforcements, the handset pressed to his ear. Priority target. Crack. The radio operator's head snapped back. He crumpled, the radio falling from his hand. Now they knew. The fire wasn't coming from the front anymore. It was coming from the flank. "Sniper! Move! Move!" The remaining 3 fighters scrambled. They were good, veterans of mountain warfare. They didn't just cower. They bounded, moving from rock to rock, trying to close the distance. They knew that a bolt-action rifle was slow. If they could get within grenade range, they could flush her out. Elena felt the cold clarity of the flow state. No fear, no fatigue, just vectors and velocity. She caught one fighter as he broke cover, trying to dash to a cluster of sagebrush. She put a round through his thigh. He went down screaming. She didn't finish him. His screams would distract the others. 2 left. The patrol leader and one other fighter had gone to ground behind a thick shelf of limestone. They were pinned, but so was she. She couldn't get an angle on them, and if she moved again, they would see her. She checked her magazine. 2 rounds left. She reached into her vest and pulled out her last piece of ordnance, an M84 stun grenade, a flashbang. It wasn't a frag grenade. It wouldn't kill them, but they didn't know that. She looked at the distance. 40 meters, downhill, a long throw, but gravity was on her side. She pulled the pin. "Fire in the hole," she whispered. She hurled the canister. It arced through the air, clattering against the rocks above their position and rolling down into their depression. The patrol leader saw the metal canister land next to his boot. He didn't wait to see if it was a frag or a flash. He screamed and scrambled out of cover, dragging the other fighter with him, desperate to escape the blast radius. Bang! The flashbang detonated with a blinding white light and a deafening 170 decibel report. Even in the daylight, the flash was disorienting. The 2 men stumbled out into the open, ears ringing, eyes squeezed shut against the afterimage. Elena rose from her cover, shouldering the rifle. It was an execution. Crack. The fighter on the left dropped. Crack. The patrol leader took the last round in the chest. Silence rushed back into the valley, heavier than before. The only sound was the wind and the whimpering of the wounded man she had shot in the leg earlier. Elena drew her pistol and moved down the slope. She cleared the kill zone methodically. She approached the wounded fighter. He reached for his weapon. She put 2 rounds into his chest. She stood in the center of the carnage. 6 bodies. 1 dead dog. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a draining exhaustion. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline dump leaving her weak. She checked the patrol leader's body. He had water. She took the canteen. He had a radio. She smashed it with the butt of her rifle. "Miller," she gasped, the realization hitting her. She had been gone too long. The firefight had lasted 20 minutes. She turned and sprinted back toward the washout. Her lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but she forced herself into a run. She scrambled down the scree slope, sliding recklessly, ignoring the cuts on her hands. She reached the ravine. She ran to the overhang where she had hidden him. "Miller! Clear! It's clear!" she called out, sliding to a halt in front of the pile of sagebrush. There was no answer. Elena tore the brush away. The hole was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, drove a spike through her chest. "Miller?" She looked at the ground. There were no drag marks, no footprints of enemy boots. The dirt was disturbed, kicked up as if someone had thrashed around in pain. And then, a trail. Not a drag trail from a captor. A crawl trail. Deep grooves in the dust where fingers had clawed at the earth. A smear of blood leading away from the safety of the hide, deeper into the dark, twisting labyrinth of the canyon. He hadn't been taken. He had left. "Delirium," Elena whispered, staring at the trail. The shock and the blood loss had scrambled his brain. He had woken up, panicked, and started crawling, thinking he was still being hunted. He was bleeding out, hallucinating, and crawling into the one place where she couldn't protect him, the storm that was gathering over the peaks. Elena looked up. The sky was turning a bruised purple. A mountain squall was coming. She reloaded her rifle, took a drink from the stolen canteen, and started to follow the trail of blood into the dark. The weather in the Hindu Kush does not turn. It collapses. In the span of 20 minutes, the scorching heat of the midday sun vanished, replaced by a wall of slate-gray clouds that slammed into the peaks. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees. The wind, channeled through the narrow throat of the ravine, screamed like a dying turbine. Elena Vance moved through the gale, her eyes fixed on the ground. The blood trail was disappearing. The first stinging pellets of sleet were hitting the dust, turning the red smears into muddy, indistinguishable blotches. "Miller!" she screamed, the wind tearing the name from her lips the moment it was spoken. She halted, crouching low to shield her face from the biting ice. She flipped her NVGs down, hoping the thermal overlay would cut through the storm. It was useless. The sleet was a curtain of cold noise. The thermal sensor was washed out by the ambient temperature drop and the moisture in the air. The world was a grainy, chaotic, gray static. "Damn it!" she hissed, flipping the goggles up. She had to do this the old-fashioned way. She crawled forward, hands searching the dirt. She found a scuff mark, a deep groove where a boot had dragged. Then another. He was moving uphill. It made no sense. A wounded man should seek the path of least resistance, moving down toward the valley floor. But Miller was climbing. Hypoxia, she realized. Or terminal burrowing. When the brain starts to die from cold or shock, primitive instincts take over. Animals climb to high ground to die. She pushed herself faster, her own lungs burning with the effort. Her legs felt like lead, weighted down by exhaustion and the dehydration of the last 10 hours. But the image of Miller, alone and bleeding in the dark, drove her forward. She found the pistol first. It was lying in the dirt, covered in a thin layer of frost. He had dropped it. He was defenseless. 50 meters further up, the ravine dead-ended into a sheer cliff face. At the base of the wall, there was a dark, jagged fissure, a shallow cave mouth barely a meter high. Elena scrambled up the last slope, her boots slipping on the slick rocks. She dove into the opening, sliding on her stomach into the darkness. "Miller?" The cave was small, smelling of damp earth and animal droppings. In the back, wedged between two rocks as if trying to merge with the stone, was a shape. Elena crawled to him. He was curled into a tight ball, his knees pulled to his chest. He was shivering so violently that his teeth were chattering with a sound like castanets. "David," she whispered, grabbing his shoulder. He flinched, letting out a weak, high-pitched cry. Don't let them. It's me. It's Echo." She pulled him away from the cold rock wall. His skin was ice-cold to the touch. His lips were blue. His eyes were open but unseeing, staring past her at some phantom enemy. "Cold," he mumbled, his speech slurred. "So cold, Mom." He was in stage 2 hypothermia. The umbles, stumbles, mumbles, fumbles. His body was shunting blood from his extremities to keep his core alive. If she didn't warm him up now, his heart would go into arrhythmia and stop. Elena knew the protocol. It wasn't about medicine anymore. It was about thermodynamics. She stripped off her wet ghillie suit and her heavy plate carrier, tossing them to the cave entrance to block the wind. She was left in her combat shirt and pants. "I need you to work with me, Miller," she grunted, pulling him flat. She unbuckled his vest, dragging the heavy ceramic plates off his chest. She cut the straps if they wouldn't open. She needed skin-to-skin contact, or as close as she could get. She lay down beside him on the dirt floor, wrapping her arms around his torso, pulling his back against her chest. She hooked her legs around his good leg, pressing her body heat into him. "You're okay," she whispered into his ear, her voice shaking from her own cold. I've got you. Breathe. He struggled for a moment, confused, but then the biological imperative took over. He leaned into the warmth. His shivering increased. A good sign. It meant his body was still fighting. The mortar, Miller whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. Did we get them? We got them all, Elena said, rubbing his arms to generate friction. 8 targets. Clean sweep. They'll court-martial you, he murmured, a lucid thought breaking through the delirium. You shot, without clearance. Let them, Elena said, resting her chin on his shoulder. I'd do it again. And she meant it. Lying there in the freezing dark, smelling the copper scent of blood and the ozone of the storm, she felt a strange, crystalline peace. She had broken the rules. She had destroyed her career. But the man in her arms was alive. The 12 men in the valley were alive. The math worked. Time lost its meaning. The storm raged outside, sealing them in a tomb of ice. Elena focused on the rhythm of Miller's breathing. In, out, in, out. Gradually, the violent shivering subsided to a manageable tremor. His skin felt less like marble. Then a sound broke the isolation, a crackle of static. Not from the storm, but from the radio she had shoved into her pocket. Elena stiffened. She reached down, fumbling with the volume knob. Sierra 1, this is Viking lead, on the guard net. Do you copy? The voice was faint, ghostly, cutting through the interference. Elena grabbed the handset. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. If she answered, she gave away their position. But if she didn't... Viking lead, this is Sierra 1, she whispered. Read you weak. Status. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, stronger, filled with a fierce, angry determination. Echo. We heard the traffic from Overlord. We heard they told you to E&E until nightfall. Affirmative, Elena said. We are secure. Miller is critical but stable. We are waiting for the window. Screw the window, Viking lead growled. We aren't leaving you out there. We refueled at the FOB. We are coming back. Overlord can have my trident when we get home, but he isn't getting my sniper. Elena felt a lump form in her throat, hard and painful. Viking, the weather is 0-0. You can't fly in this. We aren't flying IFR Echo. We're flying quietly. We're coming in low. Pop a strobe when you hear the rotors. ETA 10 mics. Viking out. The line went dead. Elena stared at the radio. 10 minutes. They were coming back. Against orders. Against the weather. Against the odds. She looked at Miller. He had passed out, but his breathing was steady. Wake up, David, she shook him gently. Time to go, the cavalry is coming. She grabbed her rifle and crawled to the mouth of the cave. The storm was still raging, a whiteout of snow and sleet. But somewhere in that white void, a black hawk was hunting for them. She checked the IR strobe on her helmet. One last fight, she whispered to the storm. The sound of a MH-60M Blackhawk is usually a distinct, rhythmic thumping. But inside the throat of the storm, it sounded like a dying animal, a grinding, mechanical whine fighting against the screaming wind. Elena dragged Miller to the lip of the cave. The snow was falling horizontally now, a blinding sheet of white static. Stay with me, David, she yelled over the gale. Do not pass out. Miller groaned, his head lolling. The warmth of the cave had brought him back from the edge of cardiac arrest, but he was useless as a combatant. He was baggage. Elena checked her gear. 1 magazine in the rifle, 2 in the pistol. That was it. If the extraction went hot, she had 30 rounds to hold off an army. She reached up and activated the IR strobe on her helmet. To the naked eye, it was invisible. To the pilots wearing night vision goggles, it would be a pulsating lighthouse in the void. There. A shape materialized out of the gray soup, dark, angular, menacing. The Black Hawk didn't fly in. It slid into existence 50 feet off the deck, rotors churning the falling snow into a violent vortex. It was flying dangerously close to the cliff face, the rotor tips inches from the granite. The side door was open. Elena saw the crew chief leaning out, tethered to the frame, looking down. Behind him, she saw the silhouette of a Viking operator on the M134 minigun. They couldn't land. The slope was too steep, the rocks too jagged. "Sierra 1, we have visual!" The pilot's voice crackled, tense and hurried. "Unable to touch down. We are deploying the penetrator. You have 30 seconds before the bad guys wake up." A steel cable began to unspool from the hoist arm. At the end of it was a heavy, three-pronged metal seat, the jungle penetrator. It swayed violently in the wind, clanging against the rocks as it descended. "Go! Go!" Elena grabbed Miller by the drag handle and hauled him into the open. The downdraft from the rotors was crushing. It flattened the sagebrush and drove ice crystals into Elena's exposed skin like needles. She wrestled Miller toward the swinging metal anchor. "Strap in!" she screamed, slapping his face to rouse him. "Wrap your legs! Arms inside!" She unfolded one of the metal seats and forced Miller onto it. She pulled the safety strap across his chest and locked it. He was limp, dead weight. Thwack. A spark erupted on the rock face 3 feet to her left. Then another. Thwack. Thwack. Elena spun around. Down in the ravine, through the veil of snow, muzzle flashes were blooming like strobe lights. The enemy patrol hadn't given up. They had heard the helicopter, and now they had reinforcements. "Contact! 6 o'clock! Low!" Elena screamed into the radio. The minigun on the Black Hawk roared to life. Brrrt! A stream of red tracers poured down into the valley, a solid laser beam of lead that chewed up the darkness. But the enemy fire was intensifying. They weren't just shooting AKs. Whoosh! An RPG rocket corkscrewed out of the mist, leaving a trail of gray smoke. It missed the helicopter's tail boom by inches, exploding against the cliff face above them. The concussion shook the ground, dislodging a cascade of rocks. "Taking fire! Taking heavy fire!" the pilot shouted. "We are losing torque! I can't hold this hover!" The helicopter lurched, dropping 10 feet before the pilot fought it back up. The cable went slack, then snapped taut, jerking Miller's body. Elena looked at the hoist. It was designed for 2 people, but with the altitude, the wind, and the damage the bird was taking, weight was time. And time was gone. She looked at the crew chief in the door. He was frantically hand-signaling her. "Get on! Get on!" Elena looked at the swinging cable. Then she looked at the tracers reaching up for the belly of the aircraft. If she strapped in, it would take another 20 seconds to stabilize before they could lift. In those 20 seconds, a second RPG would find its mark. She made the choice. She hit the UP button on the cable control on Miller's chest. She stepped back. "Clear!" she screamed, waving her arms. "Pull him! Go!" The crew chief stared at her, his eyes wide behind his visor. He hesitated. "Go!" Elena roared, raising her rifle and turning back, toward the enemy. The cable went taut. Miller was ripped from the ground, swinging wildly into the air. The pilot didn't wait. The moment the weight was off the skids, he banked the helicopter hard to the right, using the momentum to swing Miller up and away from the cliff face, dragging him through the air like a pendulum. The Black Hawk accelerated, the minigun continuing to scream, pouring fire to cover their retreat. Elena dropped behind a boulder. She watched them go. She watched Miller's body disappear into the cabin. She saw the helicopter flare, dumping countermeasures, bright magnesium flares to confuse heat-seeking missiles, before vanishing into the storm clouds. The sound of the rotors faded. The silence did not return. Instead, the valley was filled with shouting. The minigun had suppressed them, but it hadn't killed them all. They knew she was still here. They knew she was alone. Elena checked her rifle. The magazine was empty. She loaded her last full mag. She checked her pistol. One mag left. She looked at the cave. It was a dead end, a trap. If she stayed there, they would just frag it and bury her. She had to move. She had to become the ghost again. "Overlord," she whispered into the radio, knowing no one was listening anymore. "Package is away. Sierra 1 is staying on station." She stood up, ignored the fatigue screaming in her muscles, and began to climb higher, toward the storm, toward the peaks where even the wolves didn't go. The Black Hawk was gone. The rhythmic thumping of its rotors had been swallowed by the wind, leaving Elena Vance alone in a world that consisted entirely of gray rock, white snow, and the muzzle flashes of men who wanted her dead. She didn't watch the empty sky. There was no utility in it. Elena moved. She didn't run. Running was a waste of energy she no longer possessed. She flowed uphill, using the erratic terrain of the cliff face to break her silhouette. She was a ghost again, but a ghost with only 19 rounds of ammunition left in her rifle. Below her, the ravine was swarming. The enemy reinforcement element hadn't just been a patrol, it was a QRF, quick reaction force. At least 20 fighters were spreading out, moving with the disciplined aggression of men who knew their prey was cornered. They shouted to one another, their voices carrying over the howling wind. "Yalla! She is alone! Cut the ridge!" They knew. Elena slid behind a slab of granite that jutted out like a tombstone. She checked her flank. 2 fighters were already climbing the scree slope to her left, trying to get above her. If they took the high ground, it was over. She mounted the rifle on the rock. The bipod legs were icy cold. She settled the crosshair on the lead climber. Breath. Focus. Squeeze. Crack. The fighter tumbled backward, his body sliding down the loose shale, taking a cascade of rocks with him. The second fighter dove for cover. She didn't wait. She traversed right. 3 more were moving up the center. Crack. A miss. The wind caught the bullet, pushing it inches wide. The fighters returned fire instantly. A storm of 7.62mm rounds chewed up the granite in front of her face, sending razor-sharp splinters into her cheek. Elena ducked, pressing her back against the cold stone. She was pinned. She couldn't move up because of the cliff. She couldn't move down because of the army. And she couldn't stay here because they were flanking her. She checked her magazine. 17 rounds. She reached for her radio. The encryption key was still holding, but the signal was weak. "Overlord, this is Sierra 1, she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "Status on air assets?" "Sierra 1, Overlord. Assets are holding at 20,000 feet. Weather is 00. We cannot get eyes on. Viking is clear of the box. We are advising you to break contact and E&E north." "I can't break contact," Elena said, listening to the shouting getting closer. "I am fixed. I have a platoon-sized element maneuvering on my position. I am declaring broken arrow." The radio went silent. Broken arrow, the code phrase for a U.S. unit being overrun. It stripped away the rules of engagement. It authorized every available asset to fire to save the unit. "Copy, Sierra 1. Broken Arrow declared, "We have a B-1B Lancer, call sign Widow, on station. He has GBU-38J dams. He can drop through the weather on GPS. Give me a grid." Elena pulled out her GPS unit. She looked at the coordinates. 34.45N 704532E. She looked at the enemy. They were 50 meters away. They were shouting, sensing the kill. One of them threw a grenade. It exploded 20 feet down the slope, the concussion rattling her teeth. If she gave the coordinates of the enemy, the margin of error for a 500-pound bomb was too high. The B-1 was dropping from high altitude through a storm. If the bomb missed by 50 meters, the enemy survived and she died. There was only one way to be sure. "Widow, this is Sierra 1, Elena said, switching to the aircraft frequency. "I have a 9 line. Type 3 control. Bomb on coordinate." "Send it, Sierra." The pilot's voice was deep, calm. "Target location is 34-11245 north, 70-4532 east, elevation 11,200. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. "Sierra 1, confirm coordinates. That matches your beacon position." "Affirmative, Widow," Elena said, closing her eyes for a second. "The enemy is inside the wire. Danger close." "Repeat, danger close. Drop it on my head." "Sierra, I can't do that. You won't survive the overpressure." "If you don't drop it, they peel me apart with knives in 2 minutes," Elena snapped, her voice hard. "They are overwhelming the position. This is the only way to sanitize the asset. Do you copy?" She heard the pilot exhale. He understood. It wasn't just about killing the enemy. It was about preventing a U.S. sniper from being taken alive for a propaganda video. "Copy, Sierra 1. Cleared hot. Danger close. Time on target. 30 seconds. Get low, sailor." 30 seconds, Elena whispered. She dropped the radio. She didn't need it anymore. She stood up. She leaned over the rock. The enemy fighters were close enough that she could see the whites of their eyes. They saw her rise. They stopped climbing, surprised. They raised their rifles. Elena shouldered the MK-13. Crack. She dropped the man who had thrown the grenade. Crack. She hit another one in the shoulder. They opened fire. A bullet struck her plate carrier, knocking the wind out of her. Another grazed her arm. She didn't feel it. She just kept working the bolt. 20 seconds. She wasn't shooting to survive. She was shooting to keep them there. To keep them bunched up. To make sure they were close enough to share the fire. 10 seconds. She fired her last round. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber. Elena dropped the rifle. She slumped down behind the rock, curling into the smallest ball possible at the base of the granite slab. She opened her mouth to equalize the pressure. She covered her ears with her hands. She thought of Miller. He was safe. She thought of the SEALs. They were safe. She thought of the 8 men in the ditch. The count is even, she thought. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't a sound. It was a displacement of reality. The GBU-38, falling at near supersonic speed, slammed into the ridge 5 meters from her position. The fuse delayed for 0.02 seconds to bury the bomb in the rock. Then, the mountain ceased to exist. The world was not black. It was gray. A thick, suffocating gray that tasted of pulverized limestone and sulfur. There was no sound. The explosion had erased her hearing, leaving behind a high-pitched, screaming tinnitus that felt like a drill boring into the center of her skull. Elena tried to inhale. The air was solid dust. She coughed, a wet, hacking spasm that sent bolts of agony through her ribcage. She tried to move her legs. She couldn't. There was a weight on top of her, heavy, immovable, pressing her chest into the dirt. She was buried. The mountain she had used as a shield had become her tomb. So this is it, she thought. The thought was strangely unemotional. It was just data, oxygen deprivation, crush injury, bleeding out. She closed her eyes. The pain was distant, muffled by the massive shock to her nervous system. She felt sleepy. It would be easy to just stop, to let the gray turn to black. Then, a vibration. Not the ground, something else. A rhythmic thumping that she felt in her teeth before she heard it. Thump, thump, thump. The tinnitus spiked. Slowly, filtered through the ringing, sound began to bleed back into the world. Shouting. Dig! Dig! I see the strobe! Get the pry bar! Move that slab! Hands were clawing at the earth, above her. Frantic, desperate hands. Light broke through the gray. A beam of a tactical flashlight cutting through the dust. A face appeared in the gap. It was covered in grime, eyes wide and white. I got her! She's here! The rock pressing on her chest shifted. Someone groaned with exertion, the sound of metal grinding against stone. The weight lifted. Air rushed into her lungs. Echo? Can you hear me? A hand grabbed her plate carrier and hauled her upward. She screamed. The sound tore from her throat, involuntary, as her shattered body was dragged from the hole. She was lying on the scree. The snow was still falling, melting on her face. A figure loomed over her. It was Viking Led. He had come back. He had landed the bird in the crater of a 500-pound bomb to find her. Check her airway. Get a line in. He barked at the medic kneeling beside him. BP is crashing, the medic yelled, ripping open a Velcro pouch. She's got a flail chest. Possible internal hemorrhage. I'm pushing TXA and Hextend. Elena tried to focus on Viking Lade's face. He looked terrifying, a mask of rage and relief. He wasn't looking at the enemy. The enemy was gone, vaporized by the airstrike. He was looking at her. You crazy bitch, he whispered, his voice cracking. You called a J-dam on your own head. Elena tried to speak, but only a bubble of blood formed on her lips. She managed a weak, crooked smile. Did I miss? She rasped. Viking Lead laughed, a short, hysterical bark. No, you didn't miss. There's nothing left of them. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it hard enough to hurt. We're going home, Echo. Stay with me. They lifted her onto a litter. Every movement was a fresh insult to her nerves. The medic stabbed a needle into her arm, morphine warm and thick, flooding her veins, pushing the agony back behind a curtain of fog. They ran with her toward the waiting helicopter. The rotor wash was deafening. The world tilted and spun. She felt the vibration of the floor as they slid the litter inside. She saw Miller. He was strapped into a seat, unconscious, an IV bag hanging above him. He was alive. The helicopter lifted. The G-force pressed her into the nylon mesh. Elena looked out the open door. The crater was shrinking below them, a smoking scar on the side of the white mountain. It looked like a grave. She let her head fall back. The adrenaline was gone. The morphine was taking over. The edges of her vision blurred. Viking Led leaned over her, checking her pulse. He took off his helmet, running a hand through his matted hair. He looked tired. Old. Rest now, he said over the intercom, his voice soft in her headset. You did good. Elena closed her eyes. She floated in the haze, the vibration of the engine lulling her into a dark, warm place. But then, the pilot's voice cut through the private channel, sharp and cold. Viking Lead, this is Overlord. Be advised. JAG, officers are meeting the bird at Bagram. They are securing the weapons and the tapes, both of them. Viking Lead stiffened. He looked at Elena, thinking she was asleep. Copy, Overlord, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. Elena wasn't asleep. She heard it. The morphine dulled the pain in her body, but it couldn't touch the cold reality settling in her chest. She had survived the mountain. She had survived the enemy. She had survived the bomb, but the war wasn't over. The shooting had stopped, but the hunting had just begun. The room smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. It was a violent shift from the copper scent of blood and the sulfur of high explosives. Senior Chief Elena Vance sat in a plastic chair. Her left arm was in a sling, her ribs taped tight under a clean gray navy PT shirt. A bandage covered the laceration on her cheek, where the rock splinter had embedded itself. She was alive, but she didn't feel like she was living. She felt like an object being processed. Across the metal table sat Lieutenant Commander Hammond from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. He was clean-shaven, his uniform pressed to a razor's edge. He looked like he had never missed a meal or felt the wind of a bullet. "Senior Chief," Hammond said, looking at the file in front of him. He didn't look at her eyes. "Let's review the timeline again. At 0910 Zulu, you discharged your weapon 8 times. "Affirmative," Elena said. Her voice was rasping, damaged by the smoke inhalation. At the time of the first discharge, the target 1, was holding a mortar round. He had not loaded it. He had not aimed the tube. Is that correct? He was moving to load, but he had not loaded. Under the rules of engagement for this theater, hostile intent requires an imminent threat. A man holding a piece of metal is not, strictly speaking, shooting at you. Elena felt a flare of heat in her chest, hotter than the shrapnel. "He was 10 seconds away from killing 12 Americans, sir. The flight time of an 82mm round is 12 seconds. If I waited for him to drop it, the SEALs would be dead before I could cycle the bolt." Hammond sighed, taking off his glasses. He looked tired of her, tired of the mess she had made. "We aren't discussing physics, Senior Chief. We are discussing the law. You engaged 8 individuals who were technically non-combatants at the moment of impact. You disobeyed a direct hold fire order from Overlord." He tapped the file. "Do you know what this looks like? It looks like a rogue sniper who snapped under pressure. It looks like murder." The word hung in the air. Murder. Elena looked at her hands. They were scrubbed clean, but she could still feel the grit of the mountain under her fingernails. "I saved them," she whispered. "You caused a diplomatic incident," Hammond corrected. "The village elders are claiming those men were digging a well. We know it's a lie. You know it's a lie. But the press? The press doesn't care about the truth. They care about the optics." The door opened. The room seemed to shrink as Master Chief Viking Lead, call sign Odin, walked in. He was still wearing his field pants, his boots dusty. His arm was bandaged where a piece of shrapnel had caught him during the extraction. He didn't ask for permission to enter. He walked to the table and dropped a hard drive onto the metal surface. It made a heavy clack. "This is the helmet cam footage from Viking 2, Odin said, his voice a low rumble. "And the audio logs from the courtyard." Hammond looked up, annoyed. "Master Chief, this is a closed inquiry." "Open it," Odin said. He leaned over the table, placing his hands flat on the surface, invading the JAG officer's space. "You want to talk about imminent threat? At timestamp 0909, you can hear the mortar plate being set. At 0910, you hear my JTAC screaming that we are dead. We were pinned. We couldn't move. If she hadn't taken that shot, you wouldn't be interviewing her. You'd be processing 12 flag-draped coffins." Hammond stared at the hard drive. That doesn't change the fact that she disobeyed a direct order. She made a command decision, Odin snapped. She traded her career for our lives. That's not a crime. That's the job. Silence filled the room. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. Hammond looked at Elena, then at Odin. He saw the wall that stood between the people who fought the war and the people who judged it. He knew he couldn't win this. If he pushed for a court-martial, Viking team would testify. The story would come out. The 10 seconds would become public record. The Navy didn't want a hero who broke the rules, but they definitely didn't want a martyr. Fine, Hammond said, closing the file. We will call it a fog of war incident. The investigation is suspended pending further evidence. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. However, Hammond continued, his eyes cold. You are done, Senior Chief. Your medical evaluation states significant hearing loss and TBI. You are being medically retired, effective immediately. It was the compromise. No prison, but no more sniper rifle, no more teams, no more purpose. Sign here. Hammond pushed a paper across the table. Elena looked at the paper. It was a standard NDA and a separation agreement. It was a silence contract. What happens in the valley stays in the valley. She picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name. Elena Vance. Not Echo, just Elena. You're free to go, Hammond said, dismissing her like a servant. Elena stood up. She winced as her ribs protested. She walked to the door. Odin was waiting for her in the hallway. The corridor was empty, long and white. They're burying it, Odin said quietly. No medal, no recognition. Just a plane ticket home. Elena looked at him. She saw the lines, in his face, the exhaustion, but also the fact that he was standing there, breathing. He would go home to his kids. Miller would keep his leg. I didn't do it for the medal, she said. Odin reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small, a patch. It was the Viking team patch, ripped from his own uniform. He pressed it into her hand. We know, he said. That's all that matters. The guys, they wanted you to have this. Elena looked down at the patch. A simple piece of embroidered cloth. It was worth more than the Navy Cross. Take care of them, Odin, she said. Always. She turned and walked down the hallway toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the heat of the Afghan afternoon hit her one last time. Outside, the base was busy, planes taking off, trucks moving, soldiers laughing and smoking. Life went on. The war machine kept turning. Elena walked past them, invisible, a woman in civilian clothes with a limp and a small bag. No one looked at her. No one knew that 48 hours ago, she had held the power of God in her finger for 10 seconds. She stopped at the edge of the tarmac, looking at the mountains in the distance. They were silent now. The secrets were buried under the rock, under the snow, under the silence. She put the patch in her pocket, adjusted her sling, and walked toward the transport plane that would take her back to a world she no longer understood. She was a ghost. And finally, she was at peace.